Let's do it.
Here we go.
We're rolling, so quiet.
Hey everybody, it's Nate coming to you with another Chords and Coffee. This one is extra special. I got my good buddy Nash here who knows a lot about amplifiers. And speaking about knowing a lot about amplifiers, we got Randall Smith, the father, the originator, the point of origin for the original boutique amplifier company, Mesa Boogie. Randall, it's amazing to have you on, sir. How are you doing this morning?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Oh, man, I'm so glad to hook up with you guys because when I watched your demo of our latest, the Gibson Falcons, oh, man, I'll tell you what, I was so gratified. You rang every classic tone out of those little amplifiers. So I got to give it up, to you for delivering what we tried to make sure was the potential of those 3-knob and just the truth amplifiers.
With that, you just got reverb, tone, and volume.
3 knobs in the truth, baby.
That's right. The 3 knobs in the truth.
I think that's your line, Nash. I got to give you credit for three lines.
It is
three
the truth, my
knobs and
friend. I was telling Nate, I love amps where I can really dial in my own individual thing. But what I love even more is an amp that has a distinctive tone and personality, and you can just plug in and go, and all your guitars kind of speak for themselves. It's really refreshing to just plug in and from the get-go be like, yeah, it's there, it's ready to rock. Let's grab it. Let's go to the gig. Let's go to the session. Kudos to you, my friend. We had a blast playing this amp.
Thank you. And that's so important because we labor endlessly over the minutest nuances of tone with my man Doug West, Tone Boy, and of course Steve Mueller too. And then what we realize is that with a lot of players, and particularly big name stars, you got 3 to 4 seconds. And if they don't like what you're getting in the first 3 to 4 seconds, they're not going to take. You're lucky if they'll spend some time to dial the knobs. I know the tone is there, but if it's not there immediately, no effort, you're in trouble.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. We talk about that all the time because when you're going through different amplifiers, whether it's a demo or even just plugging in to check it out, there really is this narrow window of judgment. That and I try to be open-minded on everything, but yeah, you're right. It's like if you plug in and there's a cool tone immediately, even if it's not like your tone or exactly what you're expecting, if there's something there that inspires you to continue, then you will, right? Well, yeah. Randall, I'm really humbled by the wonderful things that you said, and thank you for that. I'm going to brag on you for a second. You're a guy who figures things out. I did a little research on you, and you had not only have you made amplifiers and continue to make amplifiers, but you figured out how to do foundation excavation, how to jack up houses and fix what was going on underneath them, right?
Oh man, yeah. It was a combination of poverty and desperation.
Powerful encouragers.
Yeah, right.
Mother of invention. Okay. That's right.
Full disclosure, we were basically starving in those days. And I mean, literally pretty close to starving. Yeah, we had Prune music, but it was barely eking out. And we had to decide, well, what are we going to do? Pay the electric bill or pay the lady her rent? But man, what a background that was. And what a social event and an inspiring play. Let me tell you, this was in Mill Valley, Prune music, and you probably know the story here about, I was playing drums in a blues rock band in Berkeley in the middle 60s. Keyboard player, Sun 200S blew up, and man, it was a beautiful blow up, huge sparks and smoke pouring out of it.
Well, if you're going to do it right, right?
Yeah, he was devastated. Long story short, having been a ham radio scrap builder as a kid, I fixed his amp, and he said, wow, amazing. How did you do that? And I said, hey, necessity. And so he had the bright idea, open a music store, blah, 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 in Berkeley. And And he was right. He said, oh, I said, open a music store. What are you talking about? And he said, well, what I'm talking about is, you know how to fix this stuff. And everybody in the area is playing in bands and there's nobody to fix this stuff. So fixing led to hot rodding. And I got to thank Country Joe and the Fish for that, playing a practical joke. You heard that. But meanwhile, we were starving to death and I got sick of living in Berkeley. My time at Cal, the university, was long over. And so we're looking for a cool place and found this falling down country cabin built on a hillside in Lagunitas, now famous for beer. And as I mentioned, I was on the spring lot. First, I saved this house because it was ready to fall down. Literally, I crawled under it the day. Well, you could actually stand up because it was on such a steep hillside. So I walk in there. Water is pouring down the hillside right under the house, and it's washing out the main post on the corner of the thing. And I watched it, and it sunk right there while I'm standing under it. It moved because the water is. I thought, oh, holy! I got two choices. I can run for my life, or I can crawl up here in the mud and rat crap and try to divert the water and hopefully save my house, which I did, luckily. And then I talked to this old geezer named Emmett Murphy, and he said, son, it ain't that hard. Just get yourself some big beams and jack it up. It's just a lot of dirty labor. And then dig perimeter, pour some concrete, put some concrete blocks up, and put the house back down. The only trick is make sure the windows are all open, or otherwise they're going to break. And so that came off. I did it. And we did 3 or 4 other houses, my friends and me out there, that just to survive. That was part of how I became Mesa Engineering. Yeah, I was still boosting amps and stuff, but I needed a straight name because my other moonlight gig was rebuilding Mercedes-Benz engines on all these old Mercedes that were worn out in the area. And man, those engines, again, they demonstrated the virtues of doing it right. Because I'd grown up with a British sports car, and no matter how good you are, they leak oil, they wear out, they're just crummy. And I just looked at this Mercedes stuff and went, wow, there it is. That's how stuff should be built. So
that's really interesting, Randall, because you touched on something that I feel like the more I'm waking up every morning and taking in oxygen and facing the day and just meeting folks like yourself, the more I start to realize that this phrase, how you do anything is how you do everything, is so true. Because with your amps, there's all these options, and those options are born out of you just figuring it out, whether it's figuring out how to jack up a house or figuring out, like that. For those of you who don't know, the Country Joe story is they come in with the Princeton to your shop, right? And they want you to hot rod it to fool one of the guys in the band. Is that right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and so you do, and you basically hot rod this Princeton. And if I remember the story right, you're a fan of like the old Bassman circuit, right?
We had Bassman 000, I can't remember if it was 2 or 4 that came through our Prune music before, and it was just a used amp. The concept of vintage hadn't yet been realized, right. But we did realize, man, they call it a Bassman. That's the ultimate blues amp. And so going back to my earlier car days, I had this little Austin Healey Bug-Eye Sprite, and the only thing wrong with it was the engine was too small. So I always wanted to put a little aluminum V8 in it. I never got around to that, but it led to my whole hobby of racing. So when the guys in Country Joe said, hey, can you do something with this Princeton practice amp that's just going to melt Barry's mind? I thought, yeah, I'm going to drop a little aluminum V8 known as the 410 Tweed Bassman in this thing. And then I thought, okay, there's no way this 10-inch speaker is going to blow out on the 3rd note. And so I very carefully managed to get a JBL D120 in it and kept it totally stock looking. And then, okay, it looks like it works. I wonder how it sounds. And so I rolled out in the front. Now, this is our Prune music in Mill Valley. And man, what a location that was. There was this guy hanging around, one of the locals that just hung around our shop I'm trying to remember his last name. His first name was Carlos. Yeah, Santana. That was it. Yeah. And I said, hey, Carlos, plug into the, oh man, that's I don't want to plug in. I don't know. Come on, man. I hot rodded this thing. What has it got? I don't know if it sounds good or great or terrible or what. He plugged in. And again, Carlos is a guy that he relies on inspiration. And when he's inspired, there's nobody can hold a candle to him. And again, it was a lovely summer afternoon. The doors are open. You know, he went off. Pretty soon there's a crowd of Mill Valley denizens lurking out on the side and coming in because Carlos is doing the Carlos thing. And then when he finishes, he looks at this little amp and goes, man, that little thing really boogies. There was that name. And as I mentioned, the Mesa name had to come about, so I couldn't call, oh, this is Boogie Engineering. I need a set of cam bearings for a 59 Mercedes, or I need 2 trucks of ready mix concrete. No, I got to have a straight sounding name, and that's where Mesa came up. It was Mesa Engineering. The amp was Boogie.
That's awesome.
So it's wild. I just realized there's a weird correlation between you and Marshall, drummers who open a repair shop and started on a Bassman.
True.
Just put that together, like a parallel development of sorts.
You're exactly right, Nash. And you know what it all spawns from is the never satisfied hunger of guitar players. No matter how happy they are, they're still looking for the next guitar, the next amp to add to their quiver. And it's an amazing thing. There's no other instrument that compares like guitar. I mean, you got your sax, you got your sax. You play piano, you play whatever piano they deliver. By the way, when I was out on tour with Neil Young, I said, hey, Neil, how come you always get 3 of these concert grand Steinways delivered to every show? He said, well, because one of them is terrible, one of them is mediocre, and hopefully one of them is pretty darn good. And he was right, because I was playing a little piano then, and I would check him out earlier on. And man, was he ever right? And again, it showed me, yeah, it's one thing to make a great amp. It's another whole deal to make every amp great. And so we have spent untold time and decades sussing out why, you know, and really doing the blindfold test on some of the stuff that we came up with. Now, of course, at Mesa Boogie, there's lots of great players. And when we stumble onto a couple of these things, are we kidding ourselves? Okay, get Chris up here because we're here. Okay, Chris, are you? Oh, yeah, I can hear that difference. Man, what are you guys doing? Yeah, that's a huge, yeah. So it's all of these little things. And I could correlate that back to all of my decades wrenching on Fenders is why is this one great? And this one that looks like the same thing with Neil. Mm-hmm. Because again, tying in with these Gibson amps, one of Neil's favorite and most long-lasting is a Tweed Deluxe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had, God, dozens of them. And he had some favorites, of course. And at that time, I hadn't sussed out all of the secrets that it took me decades later to figure out. But it was too bad because the last contact I had with Neil wasn't good because he'd gotten another deluxe and he said, okay, do whatever it is you do to do it to this one. And then I got a call from his guy, oh, Neil's really upset. I said, oh, no, why? What's the matter? He said, he thinks you ruined his #1 amp. I said, I didn't touch #1. I just used it as a reference. Why does he think that? Well, because the one you just worked on sounds better.
You know, here you are, you're a guy that figures stuff out. But one of the things I also love is that, you know, players would come in. Tell the story about how you discovered the switching an amp down to half power. Because like a lot of things, you're just trying to figure it out. And you know, a guitar player had a need and you're like, sure. You didn't ask if it was, you didn't say, well, why do you want to do that? It was just like, okay, I get it. It was the guy running the Fillmore wanted whoever was the headliner to allow their equipment to be used, specifically amps, like their backline to be used by the opening act. And not everybody was thrilled about that. And in fact, they definitely didn't want them to hurt their amp. So they, I guess the story is like, hey, Randall, can you make this like half powered? You know the story I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. And you got it. You basically, that's the story. It was local band and they were more country. So they had 2 JBLs in each of their twins. And they said, man, we like it playing clean, but this band coming after us, first of all, there's a grudge for some reason. And they're maxed out and we don't want them blowing up our amps, but is there any tricky deal you can hide for them? And I thought about it back to my ham radio days, and I thought, yeah, okay, so I just basically put this hidden switch that disabled 2 of the 4 6L6s.
Mm-hmm.
And weeks after the gig, they came back into Prune Music, and I said, hey, by the way, how did that work? And he said, oh man, I'll tell you how it worked. First of all, they didn't blow up our speakers, so that's all. And then weeks later, we realized it was still set in the lower power position, because it turns out we like that better.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. And that's actually, for those of you playing the home game that have been checking out the Gibson Falcon, you've got a similar thing on that amp. And, what's really cool about Mesa is that when you think about an amplifier company, and honestly, just a musical instrument company that has continually sought to find ways to evolve the product forward while never, ever leaving behind the fact that it's a tube amp. I'm a tube amp guy, man. I'm just, I know there's a lot of cool line direct solutions out there for, plugging straight into, whatever. But I just keep going back to, so long as we're playing guitars that were essentially designed in the 50s, we should always be playing amplifiers that have their point of origin from the same time period. And Mesa has that, but you have all these options because you just listened to what players wanted and you figured it out. And that's amazing to me. So hats off to you, my friend. And I have to ask you this question. So, where do you see tube amps going? And before you answer that, I also want to say, I think it's amazing that you played clarinet, right? Back in the day?
Oh, as a little kid, my dad taught me clarinet. He was a concert first chair, but he also played sax in a big bands, had a radio show for a while. And so he taught me some fundamentals on clarinet, but he taught me the classical way. I think I spoke to you about this before when I wanted to play sax. And I took a lesson from a local cat that was just an ungodly talented musician. Like I said, he played piano like Oscar Peterson, played organ like Jimmy Smith, played guitar like Cannonball Adderley or Charlie Parker. And his main instrument was guitar, which he could play like Wes Montgomery. At any rate, he said, yeah, you can improvise. That's good. I can't teach that, but your tone, you sound like a pinched up white boy. And I said, well, look at me. I'm a skinny, pinched up white boy. He said, did you ever take clarinet lessons? I said, yeah, maybe that's the problem. Is my dad was he was a hell of a concert player. He said, that's it. You got to get rid of that French embouchure. So he schooled me on the zen of the horn, because that's what he said. I said, how did you learn to be such a fabulous player in a year? And he said, well, I spend 10 hours at least a day playing. Wow. And I literally follow Cannonball Adderley, because Bird was dead, and sit at his feet. And I'm just studying the way he stands and breathes and all that. So that's what he taught me, the zen of the instrument. And going back to you, Nate, man, you are a finesse player, and that's why you got so much out of that amp, because you could dial back the volume control and lighten your touch and get the amp to sound clean, even though the amp, because when you turn up the volume and play with a little bit more gusto, it's way into crunch and beyond, right? Well, most people, or I shouldn't say most, yeah, maybe it's true. Most people don't have that finesse of touch and that refined hearing that you've got. They really do need to have an alternate lower gain setting. And there's no better example than Neil Young himself. I mentioned his favorite amp becoming the Tweed Deluxe. But what he needed was a thing called a whizzer that the guy that I turned my gig over to made. And it was a mechanical device that literally turned the volume knob. So he had 2 presettable settings of the volume knob on his Tweed Deluxe. One was down low, so it would be somewhat clean, clean, not really clean, but soulfully clean. Huh. And the other is turned way up, so it goes into that imploding, collapsing thing that you get with that kind of cathodyne driver, which is what's in those Gibson amps. That's where a lot of that character come from. And it's this irony that is the cheapest way to make it. And yet it's got a character. Now, when they designed those amps, they put that in because, yeah, that's the cheapest way to do this. And they had no idea that people were going to turn it up and make musical expression out of distortion. Because these guys are engineers, and to them, distortion is akin to food poisoning to a chef, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually that's really funny. By the way, I love food metaphors for music because music and food are basically, you approach them the same way, in my opinion. But Neil Young had a device that mechanically moved the knobs. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, called
That's great. So was it like it like you hit a button and it went zzz?
Yeah, it's a foot switch controlled little box with a motor in it, and you could set the limits of the two extremes, how low it went and how high it went.
I've never heard of one of those.
Yeah, well,
kind of blowing my mind.
It was custom built for him. Now,
That's
if you,
awesome.
I'm having a hard time not saying too much, but you just wait, because on the horizon there is the Whizzer. You don't need the Whizzer anymore. A solution that will be bursting on the scene sometime in the future.
That's thank you, because I was going to ask you, if there was anything you could talk about the future of tube amps. So that's a little nugget for our Chords and Coffee family out there. There is something coming. Fair enough.
Things coming. I can't stop. But you know what? You guys, what you especially, Nate, drove home was how well and how much a good player can get out of the simplest amplifier. And it's really gratifying on the one hand, and on the other hand, it makes me scratch my head and goes, yeah, how many guys do we lose because we offer too many options? And they got that 3-second window for an impatient guy that, no, that's not my sound. Well, your sound is in that amp, but we need to dial it for you, get it in the right mode and dial it. Now, again, the range of expression that these Gibson Falcons can do under a player with your skill and talent that's practically all you need, right? You went from jazz clean. I loved your chord soloing. I grew up playing flute and sax along to that kind of, little Latin influence, but it's jazzy, got some sweet chords and harmonic motion. Oh man, I just love that. But then you get up into crunch and grind and blues, and it was all right there. And I was like, well, what more can you ask of an amp? What more does it need to do?
Every player is different. And first of all, thank you again for all the wonderful compliments. I have friends, and I was just having a conversation with a buddy of mine yesterday about this. Some guys want to be able to work their volume knob and have the volume knob offer some kind of dynamic expression. Other guys want to be like, no, I just want to run everything wide open, and I want to, get it out of the amp, which is great. Where, Mesa gives you a lot of different options to run the same amp a multitude of different ways. And so I think the operating system, whether it's simple on the amp and, you get pedals into the equation and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat, just so long as you're skinning, right?
Well, hey, Randall, I wanted to ask you real quick. This is something I've been asking in previous interviews, and I'm always surprised by the answer. Where do you get most of your ideas? What are you doing when something pops into your head and you feel inspired and ready to just hit the ground running? Where are you typically? What are you doing? And what kind of prompts that flow of ideas?
I take suggestions from anyone and anywhere. And primarily they're from our two in-house cats, Doug West and Steve Mueller.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them are dedicated, burning guitar players. Doug West is Tone Boy. He grew up in Mill Valley. He says I sold him his first guitar. He was 8 years old. I don't remember that, but I do remember he bought a Mesa Boogie, 100-watt with a JBL when he was, I think it said 11 years old, 11 or 12. And I said, how in the world did you ever afford that? And he said, well, I mowed lawn. I said, Doug, there's not enough lawns in Mill Valley. At any rate, he is Tone Boy, and he is like all you guitar players. He always wants more and different, and he's not alone. Steve Mueller too. He backs us up, but he's also had some great ideas. And I've mentioned stuff to Steve, for example. So, well, like on the Lone Star Classic that had 4 EL84s. And he said, yeah, I love the way you shut it down from 4 tubes to 2 tubes. Is there any way you could shut it down to 1 tube? And I said, I remember telling him, I said, no, you can't do that because the output transformer, literally the shape of the metal, it has to be different. It has to be gapped to work in a single-ended, and it has to not be gapped to work in a push-pull. There's no way I could do it. Then I was swimming and I thought, wait a minute, maybe you could fool the transformer into thinking, even though it's only running 1 tube, that you could have a load resistor on the outside. Oh, it'd have to be a huge load resistor. How about if it was the other set of tubes and it just wasn't seeing audio? And I went, let me try that. And it seemed to work really well, because if you didn't have that other tube, which was just fooling the transformer. And so I called my transformer engineer and laid it out. And he said, that's a freaking brilliant idea. And I said, it appears to work. What do you think? And he said, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. And so I applied for a patent and got it. And that's the way to switch from push-pull to single-ended.
Wow.
And then again, it obviates the need, because again, he told me, oh, the transformer, the iron, it can't be gapped, or it has to be gapped. And what are you going to, you can't. That's the metal. That's the core of the thing. And so I found a way around that. And that's one of the things that keeps it exciting, that engineers would never figure out, because they're not into creative lunacy, which is the basis of guitar playing. I mean, it's an outlaw deal, right? The whole thing, distortion. And that's why I was looking, again, having the good fortune to be born at the right time and come up in the right place. We watched Fender. I was a repairman when Leo had to sell, and CBS changed everything and blah, blah. But even before then, the direction of Fender amplifiers was being guided by engineers who thought of distortion as unwanted. You do everything, and yet here's all the guitar players going, man, distortion is a huge expressive enabler. And so I just went for that. I just went for what, and again, that allows you to come up with, well, the high gain thing. Because again, back in the old days, the problem was people wanted the sound of an overdriven amp, but you could only get that by turning it up as loud as it would go. And in some places it was too loud, in other places it wasn't right. And the death knell for our little blues rock band was when our guitar player saw Eric Clapton and went out and bought a full Marshall stack. And then instead of his little Ampeg 212 that probably had 40 watts and blended in fine, it is, I have to turn that damn thing down. No, I have to turn it up to get my tone. And I was like, holy crap. And then, so you probably know the story. Another guy that's a great musician and a great friend, Lee Michaels, another guy that hung around. In fact, he ended up buying Prune music after I was gone, and it was going broke. And he had the greatest line, because he said, well, if I don't buy Prune music, I won't have any place to hang out. That's really what it was. But he came up with these Crown power amps, and nobody could, he'd hired all these companies, including Fender and Acoustic and some high-tech companies. And, nobody could come up with a preamp that made them sound guitar worthy. And so that's how I accidentally swerved into high gain. And, and we were just floored, because I said, I don't know what kind of a signal it takes to drive these Crowns. So I'm going to start off with my favorite Fender basement preamp, and then I'm going to add another tube to it. And I'm going to put adjustments at several points along the control path, signal path, so that we can turn this up and turn that down and so forth and so on. And man, when we got it working in his house, and he hit the first big power chord. It just about blew us through the back wall because it had all of that crown power, but it had this mega gain. And we got to dialing it, and you could get the fattest, cleanest, most gorgeous Fender clean, or you could turn it up. Because again, this didn't have double the gain. It didn't have 10 times the gain. It had 80 times the gain if you turned it all the way up. So we suddenly realized this is a whole new realm of possibilities that nobody's ever heard before. And it certainly did that deal where you could have this massive overdrive, but then turn the signal amplitude down. Mm-hmm. And so I had separated overdrive characteristics from playing loudness, and at the same time enabled far more overdrive than you could ever get just by turning an amp up beyond its power rating.
Mm-hmm. So Randall, when I was growing up, I was a metalhead. So the thing to have, of course, was the intimidating dual rectifier. We all had them. We all threw out our backs. That was the thing to have. So, you know, growing up as a metalhead, I associated Mesa, you know, with heavy metal and hard rock music. But, you know, you have a rich back history of a lot of different circuits that have nothing to do with those genres. I noticed recently, you know, with the California Tweed and the Fillmore, you've sort of circled back around to your point of origin. Was it the market that prompted that, or just trying some new things? Like, what brought around that sort of going back to your point of origin and trying some like lower gain amps and hitting the market with those?
Yeah, good question, because we're basically all Fender guys, and there weren't that many Marshalls even out on the West Coast. That was more of an East Coast phenomenon, and especially for our little store in that era. But as we got into Mesa Boogie sometime later, we came up with this idea. Well, we nicknamed it the Stylist series because we you know, the observation is obvious. Everybody plays either Gibson or Fender guitars that were created in the 50s and continued on into the 60s, and then it stopped, right? But the guitars being the same, there is such a wide variety of musical styles, from clean jazz to country to rock to blues to metal. And what's the difference? The amplifier. Mm-hmm. It's the same guitar. It's either a Les Paul, an SG, a Tele, you know what I'm saying? It's a Strat. It's the same basic guitars, and yet the tonal palette and the musical style. So we had this thing, the Stylist series, and we made some. Again, coming from the Fender-y thing, we made some lower gain amplifiers. You probably didn't even hear of them. The Blue Angel, you ever see one of those?
Oh yeah,
I've sold a Blue Angel.
Yeah, I used to play in a band with a good buddy.
Yeah, because
Blue Angel. Yeah,
we had a hardcore biker blues player in the band who was a good buddy, and he said, "Oh well, masters are for sissies, you know." And so we got to make an amp without a master, and then we made something called the Maverick that was pretty darn cool. And then we wanted to make something because the hair metal was coming on at that time. And, you know, here we had these your friendly little boogie amp, and that just wasn't the image anymore, right? Especially from coming out of LA. So it was like, well, how outrageous can we get? And that was really and we had no expectation that those rectifiers were going to be the massive success that they were. And you made the point that hey, for a long time, everybody, oh, Mesa, those are just those heavy metal guys. No, that was just one product, but it overshadowed everything else we did for the simple reason that there were more players that wanted that. Mm-hmm. Wanted Blue Angels or wanted Mavericks or Mark I reissues or Mark IIs or whatever. So, yeah, and like Dougie said, he said, man, we've had at least 3 that were iconic, changed everything. The Mark I, the Mark II C Plus, which in its era, everybody played those, from LA studio guys to Metallica, and then the whole rectifier thing. And so, yeah, we had to kind of reestablish ourselves with the more traditional players who didn't want to even try it. Oh, I don't want to try an amp. Oh, not there. No, they're just heavy metal.
That was my thing. Like I remember when I was that age, I'm like, why would I buy something that doesn't have the most gain I can possibly get? To me, that was like, I want a fast car. Why would I get like a minivan? Because that was my whole mentality. You want more gain. It must be big. It must be crunchy. It must be intimidating and loud.
One of the guys told us, he said, and this guy turned out to be a great guy and a good, decent player. He said, yeah, I wanted to learn guitar to chase girls and stuff. And man, it was too hard. And I was giving up. And then I got a rectifier and learned a couple of power chords. Man, I'm there.
Well, you know what? That brings up kind of an interesting thing too, because now with this, this partnership handshake between Mesa and Gibson, now you can do things, like the Gibson Falcon, as a for instance, that are, sort of ironically kind of back to where you started, right? But also to your point, like you said earlier, things that are from a interface, just from the operating system of the amp, being more simplified and not having all those different options. And I'm just curious, and I bet you there's a lot of Chords and Coffee folks that are curious too. And I'm not asking you to divulge anything, but is there more coming that is under that same sort of umbrella of that kind of more vintagey operating system with Gibson amplifiers?
Yes. Next question.
Yes, that's great. That's good enough for me. So here's something that also, I keep thinking this, and I keep meaning to ask you. A lot of my favorite players, electric guitar players, have a tone that is described as horn-like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or even like there's a guy I love, Jimmy Herring, and when people when I've turned them on to Jimmy Herring, I'll say like, this is like the John Coltrane of electric guitar, and the fact that you had a dad that was a great horn player, but also instilled that in you. I wonder like how much of just that tone and the way that tone is shaped and the way that sounds and approached has infiltrated the way that you think about guitar tone.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the thing that's so incredible about guitar is it's a rhythm instrument kind of primarily, but it can also be a lead voice. And that's when you want that vocal tone. And Carlos Santana, again, just one of the many guys who hung around our store, kept saying, man, I want to sustain, man. I want to sound like a saxophone, though, where the note doesn't go plink and die out. And can you make an amp that sustains? And then when I swerved into this high gain with Lee Michaels and his crowns, I thought, forget the crowns, man. I want to build this up into a little 4-6L6, little Princeton size combo and candy this to Carlos. And then, of course, he toured the Abraxas album with my little snakeskin gain monster and put both of us pretty much on the map because he had that vocal tone of great sustain. And let me tell you a great story, because he was up in our tone lounge at the factory hanging around, and he said, man, I never forget, I was riding in a cab with Bob Dylan, and we were going to Madison Square Garden, and I had my boogie on the back seat between the two of us. We've been invited to sit in with the Stones on an encore. And so I carried my amp up, and when they gave me the wave to come on up, and Keith said, man, what's the matter with you? We're the Rolling Stones. This is Madison Square Garden. You brought a freaking practice amp? Well, what's going on with this? And he says, Keith, just listen. Don't worry. And this is Carlos talking. And he says, man, they gave me the nod. They're playing Sympathy for the Devil, and they finally gave me the nod. He said, I just hit one big fat note, held it, and it soared over everything. And he said, Keith goes, what is that? And then I picked up the story and I said, yeah, I got the phone call like the next day. And it was Ian Stewart, the unknown Stone. And I hear him, he's in and Keith's in the background. And I finally, and I said, hey man, sure, I'd love to build you an amp. But is that Keith? Can you put him on, please? And Keith comes on. He couldn't be nicer. And I said, Keith, here's the deal. I'd love to make you an amp, but you got to pay for it. I'm just a starving cat here. I'm not some big corporation. Oh man, well, we don't pay for amps on it. Said, yeah, but look, if I could afford to give away amps, wouldn't it be better to give it to some broken down blues player who? Your big problem is taxes. You guys are earning so much money and the British tax. So here's what: you send me the money, I'll build the amp quickly, and I'll get it out to you. And if for any reason you don't like it, you can sell it immediately for cash and use the money to buy drugs. And then I thought, oh, I think I stepped off the plank there. Oh man. And long pause. And he says, right, mate, that would be a great plan. And we could have written it fewer expenses, but I played Carlos's amp. I don't want one. I want 6. Here's Jane Rose. She takes care of the business. You just give her the number and build those amps. And that became the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
So you sold
Nuts.
You sold, and so at that time, like you said, you were living probably amp sale to amp sale, right?
Pretty much. And it
you
was
sold Keith Richards 6 amps over the phone.
Yeah. And,
Well, if you ever get tired of making amps and you need a sales job, come on, we'll take you.
Hey, there were so many in that time. It was such, I don't know what, it was a groundbreaking deal. George Harrison. In fact, this is a great Harrison story. He's sitting there and there's a gold top hanging on the wall behind him. And he says, that's what we needed in the Beatles, you know, Les Paul.
What? So he's like, yeah, having Les Paul join the Beatles, basically.
Les Paul. We needed Les Paul.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, my gosh. All right, I get it.
Yeah, see, it takes a moment. Hey, but I got to tell you, Paul is golden, man. We got a chance to hang out with him, and he's been playing our bass amps. I've lost track, over 30 years. What a sweetheart. What a great, oh my God. So at any rate, I could go on, but no need to. What's your next question?
Man, we love your stories. You have shaped guitar tone and you have made an impact. You know, one of the things that is something I think about all the time, and hear me when I say this, because this is not a downer thing. To me, this is a powerful thing. I'm a dad. I've got 2 boys, and a lot of the folks that are watching Chords and Coffee right now, they're, family people, and they have kids, and, they have to fight and scrap for every minute of guitar time that they can, because there's so many things pulling at their life, that are responsibility and, just making ends meet. Right. And so to hear you talking about having to go through your own trials and tribulations in the same way, it's a comfort, it's an encouragement. But one of the things I think about a lot is that my guitar will outlive me and someone will be playing that. And I think it's amazing. It's the same with amps. I have I've got an old Fender Dual Professional that I got off a guy who played a pedal steel, or a pedal steel through it. And I've got an amplifier that was modded by a guy when I lived in Columbia, Missouri, named Wayne Brown, who was a Fender Gold level tech, who was a great human being. And and these guys have passed on, and now I have it. And that legacy that is ingrained in what you build. People need not to forget that all these stories, these outlandish stories that are like incredible, Keith Richards, Santana, that's like in every Mesa Boogie that you get. And then when you pass it on, that person's gigs, while they might not be as wild as Carlos Santana walking on stage with the Stones, it's still important. It's still somebody's life, and it's still music. And I wonder if you think about that kind of thing too.
I do. I have endless appreciation for so many levels. The players who have made, I'm just the luckiest guy in the world that I was able, almost by necessity coupled with accident, to swerve into truly what I was born to do, because I love to build electronic stuff as a kid. And there is no, and yet the nexus with a musical instrument, because again, my dad told me, he said, son, a musical instrument is different than anything else because it has an unlimited lifetime, and you cannot tell whether this sax is 2 weeks old or 50 years old. Piano, violin, guitar, the same thing. And look at what we're playing. We said earlier, 1954 or so, we got Les Pauls coming out. We got Strats coming out. We got this stuff coming out that it's classic, and it's legitimate musical instruments. And that's what I sought to build in the amplifier category. Is these aren't just like a little radio. This isn't even a little hi-fi. This is a musical instrument. And it's all about enabling the guitar player to unleash himself and find new avenues of expressive fulfillment. And man, there's nothing more gratifying than to see amps that I built back in 1974 and 5 that come through the shop. Mike Bendinelli's been with me for what, 45, 47 years or so. And he restores those amps. They usually don't need much, a couple of tubes, and the volume control gets worn out just from being turned so many times. Couple of capacitors and you're ready to go again. But again, I give thanks. I'm one of the luckiest guys to have turned a hobby into a living and have the opportunity to meet the people. And I'm including worldwide, our distributors, our dealers, and of course, all the guys at the company. Man, I'm just so fortunate. So it's, it's an opportunity and it's a responsibility to deliver the real goods.
That's awesome. What a great answer. Here, and before we go here, Nash just reminded me, I don't know if you can see this, Jordan. I don't know if you can get the camera, but right here behind me, that's a 79 Boogie.
Look at that.
This popped into the shop the other day, and we just had to show you this because I love this thing.
I saw it in the background, and I thought,
incredibly loud and just wonderful.
Did that look familiar to you?
It totally does. It totally. And here's the story behind that. I hated Tolexing amps, and so I was building the cabinets, the chassis. I was silk screening the nameplates. I was even silk screening, etching, and drilling the printed circuit boards.
You're doing the whole process.
Everything. But I hated Tolexing. And I hated the Tolex aftertaste, I called it, because you sit there and slap that glue on all day long. I finally figured out there's only one solvent that works to get that glue residue off of your tongue. You know what it is? Vodka. Vodka is the solvent for the Tolex aftertaste. And if you do a perfect job Tolexing, nobody thinks anything of it. I'm going to go buy some wood, cut some dovetails into it. And what am I going to use for a grill cloth? Well, I was repairing my broken chairs and recaning them. And I thought, hey, that's pretty organic. Let's put that wicker cane grill. And
it's become kind of your thing too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I totally associate your brand with that. And like the upper end finishes as well. Yeah, typically have those. So that's funny that it came from, here's some materials I have around here that could work.
And here is, I hate Tolexing. So let's make a cab that does not need Tolex.
Well, and it's gorgeous. And so just for the sake of clarity, since this is 1979, is it possible that your very hands were in the guts of this thing?
Yeah, 79. It's very likely, because it would have been made in my house in Lagunitas. We did not move. We moved into the Petaluma facility where we still are on the 4th of July, 1980. So if that's a 79, that would have been built in my house. And so it's either got my initials or it may have Mike Bendinelli's initials, but it's one or the other on it. Period.
So cool.
So here we are talking about legacy and about things, carrying on farther than what our physical bodies do. And then there it is.
It's been so fulfilling to me, and I give it all to guitar players, that you guys have enabled me to have the life that I've had, which has been so far beyond any expectations I might have had. And again, to have friends earlier on, now I've outlived almost all of them, but all these distributors where Spain, Italy, England, Japan, Australia, I mean, around the world that I've visited, and they've come and stayed with us. And gee, even the Japanese distributor became such a great friend. He was my best man at my wedding. The depth, and again, there is a commonality in this entire industry that everybody has some musical, crazy, artistic inspiration. So, man, it's not, I don't know any other industry, but I doubt if you're into selling shoes or if you're into selling oil, that you're going to meet the same kind of people that populate the MI industry. And one last thing that's so important is, man, I can't think of any other technology. You alluded to this earlier, tube technology. And only in guitar amplifiers is that still unparalleled. Because even these guys that I know that have worked at Apple and these high-tech things, they tech out in 5 years or so. They're obsolete. And man, I am so obsolete that you can't go away. Nobody's being taught tube technology anymore, although it's pretty basic and simple. And you're right, I did start this whole concept of boutique. We didn't think of that. We just thought about, hey, we're starving, let's build an amp and sell it. And then it was like, wow, look at that. We actually did. And so it's been a blessing. And I thank the guitar players out there, the musicians, and man, I'm here to serve. Because I love what you all do. And again, the variety of musical styles that dictate so many different styles of amplifier. And they're all equally valid. Since I don't play guitar, two things. Since I don't play guitar, I don't have a preordained favorite style. I see them all as equally legit. And I forgot what the second thing was that I was going to say. Wrap it up to age and senility. But
well, I'll tell you what, I'll tell you this. I don't know if you know this or not, or maybe you hadn't heard about it yet, but I'm going to tell you. The Chords and Coffee community. This is the most encouraging community of guitar players out there on the internet. We'd love to encourage one another, and we want to encourage folks not only play guitar, but just to live life the best you can with the guitar in your hand. And Randall, that's what you're doing. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here with us. And I hope we get to do this again. I'd love to meet you in person. And we're excited about being able to offer Mesa Boogie. And we're just excited about the future and everything that you're doing with this great company and have continued to do. So thanks for being with us. And folks, thanks for watching. And we'll see you next Saturday morning, 9 a.m. for another Chords and Coffee.